Hey, what's up? This is a quick mold process for my new dead meat part 6 Jason. It's hyperlapse 4 times the speed. So I like to lay mine down and do the front first. That way I can make sure I get all the details. Pouring up, I'm mixing up a beauty coat. It's a slightly thinner mix of Ultracal 30. I like to pour it on, then brush it in, all the details. And then I have this little air gun that I like to shoot to pop any air bubbles. But yeah, I go around brushing all the detail. Just trying to make sure I get it in all the wrinkles, make sure everything's nicely coated. I highly recommend the air cannon, the little air gun. It's electric. So then here I'm just pouring a little extra on top of what I've already brushed. You don't really want to disturb what you brushed on. You're just kind of layering it just to give it a little extra thickness and finish off what's in the bucket. So I usually let this sit until the shine goes away, so it looks matte. It's hard to say exactly how much time goes by because it just depends on the weather, how cool it is in your room and stuff like that. But once the shine goes away and it's starting to look like a matte finish, you can start with the next layer. You don't want to do it too soon because it'll slide and pull what's not set. I mean, it's not set yet, but you just want to give it some time so that nothing's moving around when you put the next layer on. So this one I'm going to do, this next batch I mix up a little thicker than the beauty coat. I like to use my drill for this one, just to help speed up the mixing process. You don't have to, but I do. Using a drill will also increase how quick it starts to kick off, so you want to be mindful of that. And I just literally just pour it all over, making sure that it all flows and there's not a lot of, you don't want gaps to where air pockets can form. You want to be like consistent with it, and just cover the whole thing just to give it some thickness. And then I take a chip brush just to kind of smooth everything around, make it consistent. And if I see any little air pockets, I smush them together. So again, I'll let this sit for some time till that shine goes away. And then I start on my burlap layers. You don't have to let the shine go away to do the burlap, but I like to do it just because I don't want any of the burlap sliding when I'm putting it on there. So with this one, I mix up a bigger batch, more water. And I cut these into long strips, and I'm doubling up. So there's two back to back when I dip them. And you just want to slightly wring them out. You just don't want them to be super dry. You don't want them to be super wet. So, and then just strategically, put them all over, overlapping, just about like a 1/2 inch, so that you don't have any gaps. You want a nice even thickness all the way around. I usually use about 2 yards of burlap um, for the front and for the back. I cut them in probably about a little over a foot long, about 6 or 7 inches wide, maybe 6. And like I said, I two at a time. And then sometimes to really thicken it up, I'll fold those in half so that it's like a 4 thickness, just to help build up a low spot. And then with this one, I'm actually going and I'm mixing a little bit more, just to I had a couple pieces of burlap left that I wanted to put on there. And you can also, sometimes if you don't have enough plaster from the burlap, mix up a little bit more just to put on to cover the burlap that might be showing through, just to smooth it all out. It's really just to make it look pretty. You'll see me do that in a minute. I used to do thinner burlap, like single ply, but more. I would do more layers of just plain plaster, and I felt like I was just using so much plaster. So I started doubling up, using bigger strips of burlap just to help build that thickness. And so far, it's worked out a lot better. I'm using a lot less plaster. And it also seems to make them not as heavy, which is always a good thing. So yeah, this is usually, it's about a 4 to 6 hour process total, um, 2 to 3 hours per side, and then you got to let the Ultracal, when you're done with the first half, you got to let it sit for 30 minutes to an hour. I usually let it go an hour just to be safe, before you flip it over and start on the backside. But yeah, this is me mixing up a little bit just to cover up the burlap showing through, just to make it look pretty and less painful when it's dry and stabby. It's not necessary. I mean, you could have just stopped at that point, but I like to make it a little bit smoother. I let it sit there for just a little bit before I start brushing it around, just so it, thickens up a little more. I'm not sure if you saw it or not, but I spray Pam on the armature, Pam cooking spray. The part that's exposed without any clay, I spray that on there. And I'll use it again once I flip it over and pull the clay wall off. I spray that on the stone and on the armature, so that the two halves don't stick together. I use it as a mold release. So yeah, this is an hour later. Gonna flip it over. Start on the backside. It's basically the same process, just different side. There's a couple of things you need to make sure you do though when You pull this clay wall off. I go around and break off any pieces of plaster that made little lips hanging down, just so that it's all smooth edge. You could use like a rasp, but they're really thin, so I just snap them off with a plier. Cut off any little pieces of burlap that are showing through. You don't want that to lock with the next layer. Try to make it a little level as possible. Clean off the wall, make sure there's no debris. Get any little pieces of the old clay wall that may have stuck to the sculpture. And then you want to take little pieces of clay. I use the clay from the wall and make little pry marks, little triangles out of clay. Put them, I usually do 2 at the top, 2 on the sides, and then 2 at the bottom. So that when you do the 2 halves, you have a spot to put the screwdriver in to pry it open. If you don't have those, it's going to be really hard trying to find where that seam between the 2 halves of plaster are going to be. So don't forget those. And then here I go spraying the PAM on the armature, the gray part, and all on the gray wall. And I spray a little bit on the bottom underneath just in case anything drips over. I normally do a clay wall around the edge of the stone, just to kind of keep it from falling, any plaster rolling over the edge, but didn't do it this time. I just sprayed it with the PAM. It worked out. And then here we go, doing the beauty coat, which is just slightly thin, just brushing it around, using the air gun to pop any bubbles around the ears. And this sculpture has a lot of deep wrinkles, so I'm trying to make sure that I get it all in there. Make sure you get it on everywhere that you want the mold to be. And then I just pour the rest just to thicken it up a little bit. Lightly brushing with the chip brush just to tap plaster on spots just to make sure it's even. Alright, some time later. Like I said, just give it some time. It's usually like 15-20 minutes. Just depends on the weather or how cold your room is, and but you just want to let that shine go away, just so it doesn't look so wet. This is the slightly thicker batch just to fill in low spots, thicken it up before I put the burlap on. So yeah, the rest of the process is about the same. You just do what you did on the front after that. Do about the same amount of burlap after this. But I actually had a little bit left, plaster left when I did the burlap that I could just put it on there to cover, smooth it out, so I didn't have to make a whole nother batch. Whenever I'm mixing the burlap batch, I don't use the drill because using the drill can make the plaster kick off quicker, and you putting the burlap on takes a minute. So you want to have enough time to do each layer before it starts to get really thick. Another thing to note whenever you're doing the burlap, you don't want any air pockets. So you want to make sure that it's smooth against the sculpture, but you don't want to push too hard. You don't want to damage what's underneath, um, but you don't want any air pockets. So make sure that you're, squeegeeing any kind of air out of the burlap and making sure it's smooth. It's usually recommended to do. You need your mold to be at least a half inch or an inch or more, just so that it doesn't crack when you try to open it. I still had some burlap I wanted to put on there, so I mixed up a little bit more. And then once that starts to set, I usually take a piece of burlap and just go over the whole thing just to kind of like a sandpaper motion, just to smooth it out, so there's no stabby points in the plaster. All right, so here's the demold process. So you want to go slow. I usually um, use two screwdrivers in the opposite pry points, and you want to go opposite direction. You don't ever want to put pressure going the same direction with the screwdrivers because you're more likely to crack it that way. You want to move your hands in the opposite motion. Um, that way you're giving each side equal pressure. Um, this can be a long process, and there's no reason to hurry. You don't want to break anything. Yeah, see, that's where I was talking about. When you put the screwdrivers in, you want to go the opposite way to pry it, and then it comes right off. Set it aside. You don't want to damage the stone, the smooth part of the wall, because that will lead to the mold leaking. That's why you have the pry points. So try to avoid sticking anything other than where the pry points are. So the back half is usually the most difficult to demold. Just there's not a lot of places to grab a hold of it and pull it. I usually go from the bottom, and I think next time I'm going to add some of the clay pry points, just so I have a spot to get my screwdrivers in there. But yeah, starting from the bottom and prying that up tends to work better than trying to go at it from the top of the head or the sides. Most of the time, it just comes off once I get enough leverage on the bottom, and I don't really have to take the clay off. But this time I did, just to try to see if it helped, because there's a suction between the clay and the inside of the mold on there, so digging out some of the clay can help break that suction. You just really want to be careful if you're digging the clay out between the armature and the stone. You don't want to damage the stone with the tools. You want to use wood tools. They're less likely to damage the surface of the mold. So use like wood sticks or spoons to dig out that clay. Yeah. I also wanted to add, this is just the way I do it. It's not a definitive, everyone has to do it this way. Everyone finds their own way of doing things. So I just wanted to show how I do it, um, in case people were wondering. Yeah. As you can see, I'm using a metal crowbar on the bottom here to wedge between that. And that's okay, because there's enough of a space between the actual detail of the mold and then just blank mold. So it's not a big deal if I damage the inside of that stone. Also, if you do use metal tools, you see me using a crowbar, you want to put a piece of wood or something against the stone to keep the metal from damaging. That's also very helpful. But yeah, there we go. It's all clean. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, so feel free to ask me. Message me on here, Facebook, Instagram. Have a good day.